Charlotte had always been known as the confident one, the little girl with the fearless eyes who was not afraid to speak her mind even during royal outings. But beneath that brave exterior, she carried a weight that no child her age should ever have to bear. She had heard the whispers in the palace corridors, the hushed tones when the adults thought the children were asleep. She had seen the old photographs of a grandmother she would never meet, a woman with a radiant smile named Diana, who the world had loved and lost. To Charlotte, Diana was a ghost, a presence felt through stories and the sad look that sometimes clouded her father William's eyes. And then there was Camilla, the queen, the woman who sat beside Grandpa. Charlotte was too young to understand the full history, the pain, the scandal, and the decades of tension. But children have a unique way of sensing truth. They feel the tension in a room, the words left unsaid, the awkward silences. And Charlotte felt all of it. She felt that Camilla was the reason her grandmother was a ghost. She felt that Camilla was the reason her family carried a secret sadness. For months, she had watched Camilla smile for the cameras, host dinners, and act as if she had always belonged. And something inside Charlotte, something strong and fierce, refused to accept it. The morning of the confrontation started like any other at Windsor Castle. The staff moved quietly, and preparing breakfast and arranging the day's schedule. Charlotte sat with her brothers, George and Louis, in the private dining room. George was focused on his food, already thinking about his future role as king, always careful and measured. Louis was busy making a mess with his toast, too young to understand the politics of the family. But Charlotte was watching the door. She knew Camilla would be arriving soon for a private family meeting, and something about upcoming engagements and public appearances. When Camilla finally walked in, dressed elegantly as always, Charlotte felt a familiar pang of resentment. Camilla greeted everyone warmly, her voice smooth and practiced. She kissed the children on their heads as she passed. Louis giggled. George nodded politely. But when Camilla reached Charlotte, the little girl pulled back, just slightly, just enough for Camilla to notice. As Camilla's smile faltered for a split second before she recovered and took her seat at the table. The adults began discussing schedules, but Charlotte wasn't listening. She was building up courage, thinking about the questions that burned inside her. Why did everyone pretend? Why did they act like Camilla was their real grandmother? Why did no one talk about Diana? The conversation drifted to an upcoming family photo session, something Charlotte usually enjoyed. Camilla suggested a particular seating arrangement, mentioning how lovely it would be to have all the grandchildren gathered around her. That was the moment something snapped inside Charlotte. She could not hold it in anymore. The words came out before she could stop them, loud and clear in the quiet room. "You're not our grandmother," Charlotte said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. The room went completely silent. William froze mid-sip of his tea. Kate's eyes widened. Camilla sat motionless, her face pale. Even little Louis stopped playing with his toast, sensing something serious was happening. Charlotte continued, looking directly at Camilla. "My real grandmother was Princess Diana. Everyone loved her, and you took her place." The words hung in the air, heavy and shocking. A palace aide standing near the door instinctively took a step back, as if trying to disappear into the wall. This was the moment the staff had always feared, and the collision between the unspoken past and the innocent honesty of a child. Camilla took a slow breath, composing herself. She had faced public criticism for decades, harsh headlines and cold shoulders. But this was different. This was a child, her husband's granddaughter, looking at her with such clear disdain. Camilla tried to respond gently, keeping her voice soft. "Charlotte, I know you miss your grandmother. I never met her, but I know she was a wonderful person. And I am not trying to take her place. I just want to be part of this family and love all of you." But Charlotte was not satisfied. Her young mind saw through the careful words. "You were the reason she was sad. Charlotte pressed, her voice rising slightly. "I heard the stories. I know you were there before she died. My daddy still gets sad because of you." Kate finally found her voice, gently calling Charlotte's name, trying to calm the situation. But Charlotte was on a mission, and the truth finally pouring out after months of silent observation. William sat frozen, his face unreadable, torn between his daughter's raw emotion and the devastating breach of royal protocol. Camilla looked down at her hands, for once at a loss for words. The confident queen who could handle any public appearance did not know how to defend herself against the accusations of a 7-year-old. Louis, who had been watching his sister with wide eyes, decided it was his turn to speak. And he might not have understood all the details, but he understood that Charlotte was upset, and he always stood by his sister. With the innocent cruelty of a young child, he looked at Camilla and added, "People don't love you like they loved her, and they never will." It was the final blow. Camilla's eyes glistened, though she fought to maintain her composure. King Charles, who had been silent throughout, finally spoke, his voice strained. "That is enough." The room fell silent again, and the tension so thick it was hard to breathe. Charles looked at his grandchildren, his expression a mixture of anger and pain. He loved them deeply, but they had just attacked his wife, the woman he had fought so hard to be with. He excused himself from the table, guiding Camilla gently by the arm out of the room. As they left, Charlotte felt a strange mix of satisfaction and fear. She had said what she felt, but she also knew something bad was about to happen. William finally moved, and his face pale. He looked at Kate, then at Charlotte, and simply said, "We need to talk. Now." The aftermath of the confrontation spread through the palace like wildfire. Within hours, the senior staff knew. Within a day, rumors leaked to the press. The world, always hungry for royal drama, seized upon the story. Headlines screamed about the royal showdown, about Charlotte confronting Camilla, about the division within the family. Social media exploded with opinions. Some praising Charlotte for her honesty, others criticizing the parents for not controlling their children. But inside the palace, away from the public frenzy, the real consequences were unfolding. William took Charlotte to a private sitting room, closing the door behind them. He sat down across from her, his expression serious but not angry. He looked at his daughter, so brave and so fierce, and saw so much of himself in her. He also saw the danger. The royal family survived on unity, Eon presenting a united front. Public divisions, especially involving the children, could damage the monarchy irreparably. William spoke quietly, explaining that while he understood her feelings, there were ways to express them and times to stay silent. Charlotte listened, her eyes filling with tears. She had expected her father to be proud of her for speaking the truth. Instead, she saw the worry in his eyes. William explained the concept of duty, how being royal meant sometimes putting the family's needs above personal feelings. He told her about his own struggles, how he had learned to bury his pain over his mother's death for the sake of stability. Charlotte wiped her tears, trying to understand. "But Daddy," she whispered, "it's not fair. She hurt you. She hurt Grandma. Why do we have to pretend?" William pulled her into a hug, holding her tight. He didn't have a good answer, because the truth was that he had asked himself that same question for decades. Later that night, Kate sat with Charlotte, offering a mother's comfort. She told Charlotte that her passion was beautiful, that standing up for what was right was important. But she also warned that words could not be taken back, and that sometimes they caused more pain than intended. Charlotte curled up against her mother, exhausted from the emotional day. She had started a storm, and now she had to face the consequences. And in the days that followed, King Charles made efforts to mend the family rift. He invited the children for a private lunch, just the 4 of them. He spoke to them not as a king, but as a grandfather. He acknowledged that families argue, that feelings get hurt, and that love was what truly mattered. Louis, quickly forgiving, climbed onto his lap for a hug. George was polite, but reserved. Charlotte, however, remained cautious. She accepted her grandfather's words, but watched him carefully, as trying to understand where his loyalties lay. Charles, for his part, seemed genuinely saddened by the division. He loved his grandchildren and his wife equally, and being caught in the middle was a painful position. Meanwhile, Camilla kept her distance. She appeared in public with her usual composure, but those close to her said she was deeply wounded. The words of 2 children had cut through all her defenses, exposing the insecurities she had carried for years. She confided in friends that she had always tried to do her best, to be a supportive wife and stepmother, but she feared she would never be fully accepted. The public debate raged on. Diana's memory, always powerful, gained renewed attention. Supporters of the late princess celebrated Charlotte and Louis as heroes, voices of a new generation refusing to forget. Defenders of Camilla argued that she had paid her dues, that she deserved respect for her years of service. The royal family, usually so controlled, found itself at the center of a cultural conversation about legacy, forgiveness, and the complexity of modern families. For Charlotte, the experience was transformative. She learned that speaking truth was powerful, but also costly. She saw the pain in her father's eyes, the strain between her grandparents, and the weight that her words carried. She did not regret standing up for her grandmother's memory, but she began to understand that the world was not simple, that people were not just good or bad. They were complicated, carrying their own histories and wounds. The confrontation that shook the palace became a turning point, not just for the family, but for Charlotte herself, a young girl learning to navigate the impossible balance between honesty and duty in the brightest spotlight in the world. The confrontation had shaken the very foundation of the royal household, but life in the palace had to continue. There were engagements to fulfill, charities to support, and a public image to maintain. For Charlotte, however, the days following her outburst were a strange mixture of relief and isolation. She noticed the way some staff members looked at her now with a new kind of respect, as if she had voiced what many had thought, but never dared to say. Others, particularly those loyal to Camilla, were cooler, more distant. Charlotte felt the shift, the subtle change in atmosphere that made her feel both powerful and alone. She spent more time in the nursery with Louis, who remained blissfully unaware of the political implications of his words. He just knew they had said something important together, and that made him happy. George, ever the diplomat, tried to maintain normalcy, but even he seemed more cautious around Charlotte, as if afraid she might say something else that would upset the delicate balance of the family. William found himself in an impossible position. He was the bridge between his father's generation and his children's future. He loved his father deeply, despite the complicated history. He had worked hard to build a relationship with Camilla, accepting her as his stepmother for the sake of family unity. But he also carried the permanent wound of his mother's death, the knowledge that Camilla had been a central figure in the pain that led to Diana's unhappiness. Now his daughter had ripped open that wound, forcing William to confront feelings he had carefully buried for years. Late at night, after the children were asleep, William and Kate sat together, talking in hushed voices about how to move forward. Kate, always the stabilizer, urged patience and understanding. She pointed out that Charlotte had spoken from a place of love for Diana, and that love should never be discouraged. But she also acknowledged that Camilla was now part of the family, and that the children needed to find a way to coexist respectfully. Meanwhile, Camilla struggled with her own emotions. She had spent decades waiting for acceptance, first from the public, then from the royal family. She had endured cruel nicknames, thrown vegetables at public events, and endless comparisons to Diana. Through it all, she had remained steadfast, supportive